Welcome back to the IU427 garage, everybody. Guess what we're doing today? More wiring. All right, everybody, I know it seems endless, but that's the way it is, you know, on especially one of these Coyote cars where you've got a lot of wiring just in general with the Ford control pack and the actual chassis harness itself. On top of that, we've got just about every option there could be on this car. And so integrating every one of those into each of the harnesses as we need to makes the wiring just seem as though it drags on forever. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek on what we're doing right now, and then I'll probably bring you back later in the day to kind of show you where we're at and how much of the stuff we actually got done. All right, so right here, you can see I've got the dash harness plugged in, and the only reason I have it plugged in is because we're in the midst of repinning or rewiring a lot of the functionality of this actual dash harness. Since we're moving the headlight switch, the hazard lights, and the high-low beam selector over to our panel here behind the dash, we don't need those in the dash harness. But there are some wires in the dash harness that we do need that aren't there. If you remember when we were wiring the sensors, and this just became one of the threads on the Factory 5 forum, there was discussion about the speed hut gauges, and I commented and put in my 2 cents, and it just seems as though it's being ignored. Somebody from Speed Hut, I'm assuming, told this particular Factory 5 customers that all of the Factory 5 oil pressure gauges are 2-wire, and that's not true. He or she said that, you know, pretty much Factory 5 requested that their gauges be that way, which is not the case, because I'm staring at a sensor for an oil pressure gauge using Speed Hut gauges that are supplied by Factory 5 that are a 3-wire connector. So it's not a matter of Factory 5 supplied or Factory 5 Speed Hut gauges versus every other Speed Hut gauge that they make. It's more of a new Speed Hut gauge sensor versus an old Speed Hut gauge sensor. And I stated that in my comment, and it seems to have gone over everybody's head, and they're still in this discussion about why a 3-wire is better, and well, they've already gone to that. You know, it's like, so it is what it is. I don't know how else to explain it. So one of those things that we needed to add into this harness, the Ron Francis harness, was that 3rd wire for the oil pressure center, which is a 12-volt supply voltage to the sensor so that it can send a 12-volt source signal back to the gauge. And because this was an early Gen 3 kit, or Coyote Gen 3 kit, the 25th anniversary car, this was the time that Ron Francis was trying to play catch up with the new Speed Hut gauges. And so we have a harness that was made for the 2-wire system, and of course we have a 3-wire sender. So I had to add that wire in. I discussed that earlier on one of the previous videos, but here at the dash, what we did is we utilized which wire was it? It was this double green wire here. Where do I have it? Right here. So this double green wire right here, I gotta look up and see what it was. But on the engine part of it, on the engine harness side of it, we used the green fan thermal wire, which would have gone to the thermal switch. But since we're controlling it with the computer, we don't need that. And so I used that green at that portion. And then right here, that green wire, I soldered on a green wire here. And then that carries through to this part of the harness here. And that's gonna in turn go all the way through our other connector and out here where I have soldered on the 3-wire connector that we need for the gauge. So you can see that green wire is right here. So that's where we're at with that. Now, some of the other wires that we've got are the ones that are for the horn. We're going to put our horn in on the Russ Thompson turn signal switch. So there's a push button on the end of that switch, and we're gonna use the horn wires here. So I pulled the horn wires back out of this harness to the dash, and I've got them relocated right here, and we'll tie those in here. I'm gonna have to do the same thing with the turn signals and the hazard wires for the hazard lights. So all of those will get intercepted at this connector here, and then routed back over to here and to our turn signal switch that's gonna be on the steering wheel. So I'm working on those next. So once I get those a little farther along, I'll bring you back for that, and we'll do a kind of rundown on what's going on there. All right, everybody, music update. Pat Benatar, Heartbreaker. I'm a little farther along. It's a little later in the afternoon now, and I'm going to show you kind of the method to my madness here. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get all of the turn signal activation wires pre-dash harness, so that when we go to pull the dash, if we ever have to pull the dash can just come out in 3 clips on 3-wire harnesses, and it's done, it's out. There might be some heater switches that may have to be separately pulled out, but for the most part, it's going to be 3 connectors and the dash will come out. If we used the pigtails that were on the dash harness and then ran them back over to, for instance, the Russ Thompson turn signal switch, then we'd have that to disconnect as well. So even though we're going to have a weather pack connector for the Russ Thompson switch, I just think it's easier to do it the way we're doing it. Now, the Ron Francis harness isn't by any means the perfect harness for these cars, especially if you're going to do a lot of custom stuff. But for the average builder in their garage, it works just fine. We tend to do custom stuff on our cars, and so it almost becomes a hindrance in some ways, because you have to work around all of these connectors, these weather pack connectors, these Deutsch connectors, whatever they're using in order to connect different parts of the harness. You have to work around those, where with a more universal harness, there are no connectors in them. You can put in connectors if you want in different locations, but for the most part, they're just wires coming out of a fuse panel, and you can direct them any way you want. So if I were to wire my own car, which I'm going to be doing a custom harness in Ellie, I've got a universal harness upstairs, because it's just going to be so much easier to wire. Anyways, so here's what we got. We have the turn signal wiring right here. So we have the circuit for the turn signal flasher, and we have, it says right rear, but it's just right, and the yellow is left. Now, the reason I'm saying it's both, it's front and rear, is because everything combines on the other side of this connector anyway. So when it originally came in to the hazard light switch and the turn signal switch, they were all combined on the other side of this connector. All we've done is now we have them connected here on the feed side versus the load side of that connector. So those are right here. Those are going to connect to the Russ Thompson turn signal switch, along with our 2 horn wires. One is the horn activation, and one is the ground that grounds the relay to activate the horn. Then over here, we've got the pink, the green, and the blue, and those are for our emergency flasher. So you can see the little jumper that you would normally have in the dash harness, we've relocated over to this side of the car. It's going to hook into this switch, I believe. And then we've got the two right and left turn signal, or in this case, hazard light wires that are going to feed our flashers. So those are ready to go. So I'm going to probably pull this panel out. I'll connect that into the hazard light switch, and then I've also got, where did I put it? Oh, this is our high-low for our headlight switch. So we've got the headlight dimmer switch, which is basically power into the actual switch itself. And then we've got the low beam out, which is the red, and the high beam out, which is the brown. Now what I did here is I cut off this pigtail that was on the dash harness when this was in the dash harness, and I put some heat shrink around this little trailer wire. This wire was the indicator light for the high beam indicator that is going to be in our speed hut gauge. So what I did is I relocated that using one of the brown wires that are in here. Let's see which one it is here. Is it this one? No. Is it this one? It's this one right here. So this brown wire right here, we reused that, and it is in our harness here, and it comes out over with our indicator lights. So we have our left, our right, our ground, and our brown, which is tucked back in here, our brown, which is our high beam indicator. So all I've really done is I've just taken this loose from that other portion of the high-low beam switch, and I've run it through the harness in a different way, reutilizing a brown wire that we weren't going to be using inside the harness anyway. I've tried to keep everything color for color. So anything that I removed, in this case I removed a brown wire, I was able to reuse that for the high beam indicator. The green wire that I needed back here for our oil pressure, I kept that green all the way. It's green from here all the way under the hood to where it ties into that sensor. Now it may change in its designation, meaning if you look on that wire under the hood and follow it back to a point where it says thermo switch, granted it's not, it's not the thermal switch anymore, but it's green all the way from here all the way out to the portion under the hood where it ties to our sending unit. So I try to make everything as neat and as common sense as I possibly can, so that if anybody, including me, were to have to troubleshoot this later, everything stays the same color from one end of the harness all the way to the other end of the harness. So there was one section of this, I know it was here. In here, it was the vehicle speed sensor wire. The green is the vehicle speed sensor wire, which we eliminated along with the gray vehicle speed sensor wire, which is the feedback wire for it. So since we've got a GPS speedometer, we don't need those wires, so I eliminated it, and then I reutilized that green in this harness for that gauge sending unit. So I know this is probably getting way into the weeds, but again, I'm trying to keep this not just as entertainment, because there are plenty of channels out there for that. I'm trying to keep this to where it's a video log for the car owner, and it's to help future builders and builders that are building their cars now realize that you don't have to do it according to the instruction manual, but you want to keep it in a manner that if you have to go back to troubleshoot something later, it's all going to make sense. So I'm going to keep at it probably for another, probably 2 more hours, and then I'm going to knock off for dinner today. So I'll probably catch up with you guys tomorrow. Okay, it's been a day or two since I turned the camera on out here in the shop. I'm going to go over what we have done and what we have left to be ready to first start on the Gen 3 Coyote car here. So we might as well start in the engine compartment. I did make a stop at the local auto parts store this morning to pick up some vacuum tubes, some vacuum adapters, and some other stuff, and I'll get into that probably after I give you guys a rundown of what we've got completed on the car. So let's start at the front of the car. We have the intake tube that is in place, and we've gone ahead and we've got the evap recovery tube from the valve cover in place. So that comes from the driver's side valve cover, and from there goes into the intake tube post mass airflow sensor. So you can see I've got the intake tube in place. I've still got, you know, clamps to tighten, but I figure we may have to take this off during our first start attempt, and so I don't want to get it, you know, so tight and in place that we can't remove it quickly if we have to. So that's where it's going to stay. The vacuum line for our fuel pressure regulator is in place. I think it's been in place for a while. I think I showed that on a previous video. However, what we did work on was getting the hose clamps tight for all of the heater hoses. So we've got the upper and the lower for the heater hose. They're all tightened up and they're where they're going to be. Over here on the front of the engine, we've got the heater supply and return all clamped in place. So this one here over on the driver's side, the one over on the passenger side is in place. Over on the passenger side, we have all the clamps for our bypass valves in place. So all the hose clamps are in place over here. Now, when we first start the car, the valve will not be in bypass. It will be feeding fluid to and from our heater core. This is the best way to get all of the air purged from the cooling system. So we're going to run it wide open. And lucky for us, the way our valve, actually all these valves are kind of, I don't want to say wired, but the way they operate is that they're in the open position when they're like at rest. I hate doing air quotes, but my hand was already up next to my face. So it's gonna send fluid to and from the heater core as it sits. We're actually going to apply vacuum to it to have it bypass, and we'll do that with the solenoid vacuum valve that we've got here that's 12 volt actuated, and a relay back behind the dash, and that'll send voltage to this to actually close it. So when the heater's not on, it will be closed all the time. So that is all in place and done, and that's why I had to pick up some vacuum tubing and some vacuum adapters, because the vacuum port that we have available is like a 3/8, and we're going all the way down to 7/64 to the final valve port for our vacuum bellows on the 4-port valve. So I've got to use a series of adapters in between each one of those parts in order to make it all work. But you guys don't need to know that. Now you do. We have all of our wiring in place here at the ECU. So all the connectors are tied in, all the connector ends are locked in place. I did find out that our mass airflow sensor has an accompanying wire that trails off with it at the very end for an ambient air charge sensor, which by every indication of what I've read is not used. So what I did is I just tucked it back in on the wire harness back here. If it's something that we can confirm that will not be needed at any point in the future, I'll just go ahead and I'll diet those wires back to a point in the harness that we can cut off the connector, and we'll put the connector in with all the other connectors that we've cut out of the harness, so that if any point the car owner decides that he needs that connector for something, he'll have it available. It can be spliced back in. So that's that. I've gone ahead over on the driver's side and I've safed off a bunch of wires for our first start. But over here on the passenger side, I've done the same thing. So as you can see here, we've got the radio memory wires, we've got the heater wire, the wiper wire, all these things that we're going to be using for our dash stuff. I'm not going to wire all that in for first start. So I've just got them safed off with wire nuts. Now don't judge me. These are going to be here for first start and they're going to come off and they're going to get tied into whatever they need to be tied into for the associated accessories that they're going to be. On the driver's side, as I mentioned, I've safed off all of the wires that I know are going to have voltage present when we do first start. So the turn signal flasher wire that feeds power to the turn signal flasher, I've got that safed off with a little bit of black tape. The pink wires for the hazards, I've got them safed off with a little bit of black tape. There are wires in here in our headlight harness that are going to be hot. They will be active when we turn the ignition switch on or when we connect the battery. They're concealed in a connector. They'll be fine just the way they are. But everywhere else in the harness where I know that I have to push the connectors together in order to get power to something, like if you were not using the Ford control pack, let's say you were using the Holley Sniper or the Phytech, and you were wiring into the Ron Francis harness in order to activate the cooling fan, you want to make sure that these connectors are tied together, because if they're not, you're not going to get power to the fan. Our fan is powered directly from the Ford control pack. We don't need it, but I've just gotten the habit of plugging that in now and just knowing that we're going to have power there. The rear harness wires, they have to be plugged in too. So you've got two connectors that go to the rear of the car. They're right here. A white one and a black one. They both have to be plugged in so you can get power to your fuel pump, and eventually you'll need your brake lights, your turn signals, your sending unit for your fuel so you can read your gauges. So make sure those are plugged in. Oh, one thing that I did do is I pulled out our relay for our fuel pump, and I've got a jumper ready to go. These Gen 3 Coyotes have a reputation of not running the fuel pump when you try to first start them. And so what we're going to do to set our fuel pressure is we're going to bypass the relay so we can get constant flow from the fuel pump to set our fuel pressure for the Ford control pack. I think it wants somewhere in the 60s, like 61, 62 pounds of pressure. So we're going to do that. But when we go to first start the car, we're going to let the fuel pump run bypassed. And that should allow the car to first start. And then what I have been told by my buddy Mike Everson is that once you get past that initial fire up of the engine, the fuel pump runs just like it's supposed to. It's not an issue after then. But there have been reports of a number of guys having some issues trying to first start these things where the fuel pump just won't run when you initiate start the first time for these engines. So I'm going to go with the recommendations from Mike. I'm going to bypass the relay. Hopefully we'll get our first start and it'll go flawless, and then we'll plug the relay in after that, and from there on it should be, just fine. Other things that we need to still do, we need to fill it with coolant, we need to top off the oil, and then I did bring home one of the racing fuel jugs. We're going to go and we're going to pick up some 91 octane at the local fuel station, and $20 is going to get us like four gallons of fuel. That's ridiculous, but it is what it is at this point. And we're going to put some fuel in the tank because we really need it in there to test for leaks. We need it in there to set our fuel pressure. So it just makes sense at this point to get it. We're about 4 days out from first starting this car. Won't be in this video, but you guys will probably see it in the next video for the 25th anniversary car. So that's where I'm at on this stuff today. I'm going to keep working and try to get some of this vacuum hose and a vacuum adapter squared away tonight so that the next 2 or 3 nights that I have in the shop are just going to be checking for loose ends. You know, I'm probably going to go ahead, put fuel in the tank. I'll probably go ahead and set fuel pressure so that hopefully when we go to fire this thing up over the weekend, we're going to have few, if any, issues, and it'll fire right up, and it'll be just a great celebratory weekend. And if that's the case and we have some time, we're probably going to start working on the carbon fiber dash for this, because I think the owner really wants to be involved in that. The dash layout is a very personal thing, especially if you've got some preconceived ideas of how you want your dash to lay out. I know I did. You know, I did a more of a custom layout in Slytherin than, you know, just the standard layout. So I think we'll go over that with the car owner, and then he can decide how he wants to lay it out, and hopefully we can even cut the holes and get some of the dash gauges into the dash and get that ready to go. But we'll see. Anyways, I'll catch up with you guys tomorrow night. All right, everybody, next day. I am working on getting a lot of last minute details done on the 25th anniversary car so we can get it fired up this coming weekend. I have the scan tool, the blue driver, connected to the OBD 2 port right now, and it has confirmed that it's connected, and I'm monitoring a couple of conditions of the motor. I can change these at any time. It asks you not to do any more than 5 on the actual software, but right now I'm reading throttle position, I'm reading engine RPM, fuel system. I think I'm going to delete that. I'm going to go with manifold fuel pressure, and then coolant temperature, and I'm going to probably add in oil pressure to this as well. So you can see on the screen here, this is just on my phone, that's what we're reading right now. So if I go ahead and I go in here and I push on the accelerator, we'll see the number jump up and then come back down. So we know it's connected, and we know we're reading. We know we're at 0 RPM. We know the coolant temperature sensor is probably about the same temperature as the ambient air temperature in the room right now. I've got the air conditioner set at 82, but it hasn't quite gotten down to that point yet. So we know it's connected and it's doing everything it should. So we know now that we can start the engine and monitor those vital measurements in the engine and be sure that we've got oil pressure, we've got fuel pressure, we've got coolant temperature reading, and we should be able to get this thing fired this weekend. Other things that I've been working on are just getting wires safed off here and there. I've been just going around and making sure that any of the wires that I have some tape on them so they're not going to come into contact with anything and short out. And I think, other than adding fluids, we're pretty much ready. All right, so that's going to wrap this one up. The next time you see this car, we should be firing the engine. We should be doing first start. So say a little prayer, cross your fingers for us, everybody. We hope to get this thing fired up this weekend, and then hopefully move on to the next step in this car, which is to get the body of the car over to Jeff Miller so we can finish up all the loose ends, get this car put back together, and get it back to the owner. As always, I want to thank you for watching. We appreciate every view. If you're enjoying the content here, please do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.